In today's video, I'm going to be posing a question to you. Do you know your Myers-Briggs personality type? Because I do, and I found this out probably a number of years ago now, maybe back around 2018, when I was actually doing it as a test for the full-time job I was working in. Now, I think it's always good to take these personality tests with a grain of salt. Of course, they're not going to be accurate to a T, and there's going to be things, of course, within our personalities that are not going to perfectly match these personality types that we're speaking about today. But with this particular personality test, there's a lot more scientific-based evidence and psychology-based evidence that goes along with it. So it's actually a really interesting test, and if you haven't taken one already, you might find it really interesting to actually take it and see what type you are. Now, for me, in the Myers-Briggs personality test, I am labeled an INFP. Now, INFP actually stands for introverted, intuitive, feeling, and prospecting. And for those of you who haven't heard of the test before, there's actually a combination of letters that you will get as your personality type. So I've just labeled the ones that I've turned out to be, but there's also extroverted, there's sensing, there's thinking, and judging. So those are the other traits of the test that you are technically labeled by. So as an INFP, there's a lot of traits specifically around my personality type that I do feel ring very true. And it's funny, I've always wondered throughout my lifetime why certain things were or why I felt a certain way. And now I kind of realize that psychologically, some of it is kind of ingrained in me. It is just something that I've developed in myself, and certain traits definitely do stand out from this. And I'm actually going to go through a few of them today. Maybe some of you are INFPs and you can also relate, or maybe you're a similar personality type or have similar traits and you can also relate. And maybe you don't relate at all, but that's completely fine because everyone has different personality traits. Now I'm going to go through a couple of my traits and specifically how they relate to my business, because it's not until I've gotten a bit older and learned more about this test that you can kind of reflect some of it into your day-to-day life and really look into it a bit further. And I think this has definitely come out in my business as a whole and the nature of the job that I've chosen to do, which is being a creative freelancer. So starting off with a couple of the traits that I feel about my personality that I do tend to feel is very ingrained with INFP specifically, is that I'm a bit of a dreamer and also an idealist. So in my head, day to day, I'm constantly getting lost in stories or storytelling. I'm constantly thinking of new ideas, so much so that my head a lot of the time is just completely clouded with too many ideas at times. And sometimes it's hard to actually know where to go or what step to take or how I can make a decision from that. And I think that due to that, I tend to have a lot of decision-making issues at times. And I really have to force myself to really go and make a decision, because otherwise I'm at a standstill and I don't know what to do. Now, being a dreamer and an idealist is, of course, very romanticized in some ways, but then in other ways, it can be kind of impractical. And I can kind of sound impractical to a lot of my family members at times, or a lot of my friends even. And some of the things that I want to do in my lifetime, or I've wanted to do in the past, have kind of maybe seemed a little bit out of reach, or maybe something that I thought ideally would happen in my lifetime. Maybe it hasn't yet, maybe it has, but sometimes it's nice to have those romanticized goals in your head, because without romanticizing certain things in our life, sometimes life would be a bit boring. So I really do like having that aspect and being a dreamer and having that creative thought process always going on in my mind. I feel that that very much is reflected in the business that I have today. As I said, I'm a creative freelancer, so I've always felt that doing something in the creative realm was perfect for me, and something where I could do things where I could create. And that was the main thing for me. I didn't always know exactly that I wanted to be a photographer until I was in my late teens, but I always knew that there was something in me that wanted to do storytelling or to create concepts and be conceptual with the work that I was creating. So I feel that that's very much in tune with my personality type and also the business that I've chosen to run. Along with decision making, though, that I find quite difficult within my own business at times, I find that also focusing on one task for too long or focusing on one thing at one time can also be difficult. Not to say that I'm a multitasker, I don't really believe in multitasking that much, but I do get bored easily, and I do feel sometimes that I want to be doing 20 things, but I can't. I can only do one thing. So it's really hard sometimes for me to keep that focus, and I really have to have a lot of passion behind what I'm doing to really focus on that one thing. This is why I think it's been so hard growing up in my childhood and really trying to stick to learning about one specific thing for too long, or doing one specific task for too long. Doing one specific job for too long has always been an issue with me. I was very much in and and out of casual, full-time, part-time jobs when I was a bit younger, because I just kind of felt like I wasn't finding the things that resonated with me, and I would get very bored or very disillusioned with the jobs that I was doing very, very quickly. So that's another thing that I've found has been really part of my personality, is that focusing on one thing for too long can be a struggle at times. So within my personality type and my business, I find that one thing definitely rings true above all else in my lifetime, and that is that I've always wanted and craved flexibility with my life. I think throughout my lifetime, I've found it really hard to commit to certain tasks for a long time or to certain things, and I really enjoy having that flexibility with my life, and that goes into the hours that I'm working, the kind of work that I'm doing, even down to the days and weeks and the way that I plan. Everything is based around the flexibility of what I want in my day-to-day. So that's going to be allowing me to be spontaneous, as I like to be. I like to be spontaneous on certain days, and I do a lot of things based on how I'm feeling. So that definitely rings true as well. With INFPs specifically, feeling is what the F stands for, and that's very much a very large trait of being, I think, an INFP, is you're doing things based on how you feel, not necessarily based on what your brain is thinking and the rationale behind it. You're more or less putting your efforts towards what you really crave inside. So I definitely feel that that is how I live my day to day. Sometimes I will wake up and I don't feel like doing any particular task that I've set for myself. So then working in with that flexibility of my schedule and looking at how I've set my schedule for the week, I will move things around as I see fit. And sometimes I prefer to do other things on certain days, and I really enjoy having that flexibility. I think above all else, that's definitely what I need in my life. I definitely do tend to feel suffocated if I plan too much or if I have a very rigid schedule. And unfortunately for me, although I do love doing parts of planning, and I've spoken about it on this channel before, planning, you may be surprised, does not actually come naturally to me. I can be very big on procrastinating at times, and I have been in my life, but in particular, planning was never something that I was very good at when I was younger. I really had to work hard at training myself and using different methods to plan, to find something that worked for me, to stay on top of my goals or to stay on top of my work. I was not the most organized person growing up, and even until a few years ago, I really wasn't the most organized person. So I've only recently found certain things that work for me. I think as an INFP and as someone who has some of these personality traits and craves that flexibility, I've had to find certain systems that work for me. And this is why I have so many different planners. I've definitely had questions from people being like, how do you have so many different planners? I've spoken about it on my channel before, that I've got a yearly planner, a monthly planner, daily. I've got a creative planner, a goal planner. But the thing is that I kind of need them. I need to be able to see my day, my week, my month, so I know whether I can be flexible in certain circumstances or whether I actually do need to knuckle down and get things done. And I think that there's always going to be those times where I need to do that and I need to meet deadlines, and things like that will happen. So I can't always be 100% flexible, but definitely as a creative and working day to day, I have to see my planning over a month to really know where I can be flexible and where I can't, especially being someone like me who does like to procrastinate, and it really keeps me in check and keeps me a little bit more accountable when those circumstances come up where I feel like procrastinating, but I know I can't. And I've definitely fallen into the trap, as I've done with lots of different areas in my life, where I have this kind of thing about myself where I tend to think to myself, oh, it'll all just work out. It'll all work out all right. And then it doesn't. So I definitely have that a lot, where even when I'm traveling, I don't tend to make a lot of plans when I'm traveling. My partner and I tend to travel like based on a day-to-day kind of whatever we feel like doing. And sometimes that's a great thing, but then other times it doesn't work out and we should have planned ahead. So that's another thing with planning that I sometimes am not very good with doing. I love the fact that I can be spontaneous and I just kind of like doing whatever we feel on a certain day. But at the same time, not having any planning sometimes can turn into a fail. And I've definitely learned that over my lifetime. I think another thing with INFPs that is a very standout feature is that many of them are very attuned to wanting to live their life and not being necessarily stuck within the rat race of a 9 to 5, for example. And I think, again, this goes back to how I've decided to live my life when it comes to my career and my job and what I wanted out of a freelance career, and having that flexibility once again. A lot of INFPs don't really fit into the societal standards and specifically the 9 to 5 working routine. And I definitely feel like I'm one of those INFPs for sure. I feel that a lot of the time, and specifically throughout my life, I've always kind of felt like a round peg trying to fit in a square hole, if that makes sense. So I always kind of felt like in some ways I was on the wrong track. I was always doing things maybe a little bit differently or unconventionally compared to other people. And a lot of the time, maybe within my family or my friends couldn't really understand that. And it always felt like I was going against the grain, but not necessarily always in a good way. I kind of felt not really shamed for it, but just felt like I wasn't fitting into the norm, and it was a weird feeling to have. And I still feel like even to this day, I feel like the priorities that I have may not be what everyone else has. And sometimes it's hard for me to see other people's side of that too, and to see why people have their other priorities that they specifically want to have versus mine. And I think I have very strong values that I work to at times. So sometimes I need to learn to be a little bit more understanding even of other people's values, and realizing that not everyone wants to live the way that I want to live as well. But it is really hard running a business, I think, sometimes as an INFP with these traits, is like trying to fit into the societal norms to an extent, because we have to, even though I don't necessarily want to work 9 to 5. But even things like responding to emails very quickly, or to being on top of things in a way that kind of would suit a 9 to 5 job but doesn't necessarily suit what I'm doing. Quite often I do feel like I'm sliding into a 9 to 5 routine because everyone else that I'm working with client-wise is in that routine. So that's kind of hard to manage at times, knowing that my business kind of is a little bit all over the place with working days and hours and things like that compared to other people, but I'm still needing to fit into that box at times. And then there's the whole thing about earning money and paying a mortgage and living that kind of conventional life, which I don't necessarily want to do for the rest of my life. I think there's a lot of other goals that I have that don't involve me just having that normalized life where we buy a house and we settle down and we have kids, and then we have to pay off our mortgage for the next 30 years, and that's kind of that, and I have to work like crazy to pay it off. And that's not really the life that I want for myself, and my partner's very much the same. He's also classified as an INFP as well. So I think we definitely have a lot of traits that are very similar in that way, and we don't really see ourselves living our lives maybe in the most conventional way at times. And there's so many ideas, like it's hard to really focus. I've said this before in the video, where we want to focus on things that we're doing business-wise, and then one day I might say something to him out of the blue like, hey, why don't we go and live in a tiny home? Or why don't we move to Denmark? Or maybe we could do van life for the next 6 months. There's always these thoughts going on in my head, and it's the same with my business. It's the same with what I want to do in my business or what I want to create. There's sometimes too many ideas to filter them down and actually narrow them down to something that's tangible. And it's very hard cutting through all of that sometimes in my head. It's just a constant idea machine up there, but unfortunately not all the ideas are practical or good. So with INFPs, they tend to prefer working alone, being a bit more introverted, and I am a little bit more on the introverted side. So I do generally prefer working alone, and I do prefer having my alone time at home. I do find that it's great to have that balance in my work actually, where I get to meet people and I get to have great working relationships with people and communication and all of that. But especially after things like full day photo shoots for clients, my social battery is completely dead, and I need to go home and I just need to charge it for the next 3 or 4 days before I can go out and be in that situation again at times. I find that photo shoots are very taxing emotionally at times, and even physically, funnily enough. So as much as I love that side of things, I definitely love having the balance of working at home by myself a little bit more, and then also going and having that social aspect, which I also really enjoy. So it's funny because from a young age, I knew a lot of these things about myself. I couldn't really understand these things, to be honest with you, and there would be times where I would be a teenager and I'd be looking at jobs and full-time jobs because I wanted to leave school early. And the one requirement from my parents was that I got a job. And I'd be looking at these jobs and I'd be looking at full-time jobs, 40 hours a week, and I'd look at them and go, I don't want to work 40 hours a week, or I don't want to work 9 till 5. Why can't I work like 6 till 1, or like 1 till 8, or like, why can't I have flexibility with my work, or why can't I do something differently here? And of course, back, 15, 16 years ago when I was thinking like this, there wasn't really a lot of those kinds of jobs on the market. There wasn't a lot of work where you could work from home, and it wasn't as much of a commonplace thing. Even the word freelancer wasn't a really common term, and I didn't really know what it meant, to be honest, when I was a teenager. So I did feel it really difficult, I think, growing up, knowing these things about myself, but not really knowing how I could make them work for me. But I am going to end talking about the traits with one thing that I really do think matches in heavily with my personality type of being an INFP. And that is, if there's something that I want to make happen in my life, I can usually make it happen. And I do feel really proud of that aspect. I think that there's definitely things that haven't worked out how I'd expected them to be. And that's part of me probably being an idealist and then not being very practical at the same time about certain things. But definitely things in my lifetime where I've been like, I want to do that. Or I think that that would be really cool to do and I want to try that too. Or certain things that seemed really out of reach in a lot of ways. Certain events in my life or times in my life. I've always dreamed about it and then I've kind of just worked towards it. And a lot of the time these things have happened, which I think goes to show that just because maybe someone labels you a dreamer or an idealist doesn't necessarily mean that those dreams or those goals won't come true, even if they do seem a bit far-fetched. So I do think that even doing something like YouTube was something that I wanted to do, and I, funnily enough, made it work for me. And the same with photography and doing courses and things like that, and just ideas that I've had over the years, even down to the fact when my partner and I got married in New Zealand. Not that it's business related, but it was always kind of a bit of a dream that we'd had years ago. And then we were just kind of like, why don't we just work towards it and see what happens? And then it did happen. So sometimes, as I said, these ideas that you might have in your head are far-fetched, and you might be told by other people that that's a silly idea, or it's not going to go anywhere, or you don't have enough money to do this, or you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the skills. You might be told these things and then kind of get there anyway. So I think that that's a really cool part about being an INFP. Sometimes I think that it can be a really beautiful thing, being a bit of a dreamer, and I guess being in conjunction with a creative business, having those ideas and wanting to have different ideas all the time kind of helps in that way, because you don't always find yourself looking for inspiration, and sometimes everything's already up here. You just kind of got to make sense of it a little bit more. So guys, I would love to know what personality type you are, and if you've done the test, definitely put your personality type in the comments section below, because I'd love to hear what you all are. And I'll put down the link actually to go and do the test in my description box, because I think it's actually a really fascinating test, and I don't tend to take things like this a lot of the time too seriously, but I definitely think there's something to be said for this particular test. It's interesting, I've learned even that you can sort of change maybe as you get older as well and evolve with the test. So if you have done the test before, it might be worthwhile taking another test to see if you've changed in recent years or if things have evolved for you. So if you'd like to see me do more videos on being an INFP or more on the personality test itself, because I think it's a really fascinating thing, definitely let me know in the comment section below as well. But thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!